Welcome back to another in my series on how to create great tones with our Line 6 Helix. Today I'm going to do a video I've been actually meaning to do for quite some time, but I was just waiting for the update where they added the new HX reverbs. So now that we have those, I've been given some thought to how I would go about doing a video on dialing in great reverb sounds. I was actually one of the people who was actually quite happy with what are now considered the legacy reverbs in Helix. I never really had much of a problem with them, although the new HX ones are quite nice. I haven't really had a huge amount of time to play with all of them, but we'll kind of dive in. I thought that a good way to go about this would be less about just exploring each and every reverb and going into depth on what each one sounded like. I think that that's the type of thing that's going to be so open to personal preference and the personal particular situation that each person is in to choose what reverb they're going to like. And that's easily done just by, if we have a Helix, we can go listen to the reverb and hear if any particular reverb has the particular qualities we want. But I think what's more important is understanding what the parameters do. So today I wanted to go through and really talk in depth about the common parameters we see for dialing in reverbs. And I think there might be a lot of misunderstanding out there with these. And one of the reasons I say that is because in the recent past, I've been getting a lot of submissions from viewers to edit their patches and see if I could help them tweak it to make it a little better. And one of the common problems I get is, in my opinion anyways, and again, this is so subjective and open to personal preference. It's not that I'm saying that whatever I say is the only way to do it, but in my opinion, with what I was being told by the viewers saying, I find this tone doesn't cut through, or I find it lacks sort of a presence in the mix. And then you find out that their reverb may have been the culprit for that, right? It was causing it to sit too far back in the mix. It was kind of mushing the sound up and you were losing clarity with it. And so I think a lot of that just may be a misunderstanding of what certain parameters are doing. If you already know this stuff, then no problem. A lot of people probably do. But I thought I would go over those. And hopefully by doing that, it can help all of us to dial in just a more usable reverb that's not going to have any adverse effects on our sound, okay? So let's dive right in, go over to HX Edit and talk a little bit first. I'm on the legacy reverbs. We'll go through these. I don't want this to be a 4-hour video, so I don't want to spend too much time on things that we can get through rather quickly. But, even just seeing the list of reverbs here, a lot of people kind of just go, which one do I choose, right? So let's just talk a little bit about the history of some of these reverbs. Now, basically what you're going to have is some sort of source of your reverb. Where is the reverb coming from? A reverb is just basically the sound reflections in any given space. So what is that space? Depending on what that space is and how big it is, the boundaries or the walls, what material they are, or in the case of a plate or a spring reverb, how is that reverb being created, right? So a plate reverb is a very common reverb, and what it basically what was back in the day anyways, when they first were being utilized, was a piece of metal, a sheet of metal with transducers attached to it, and the signal would be sent in, and it would excite this piece of metal, and then the other transducer would pick that up and turn it into an electrical signal, and there you go. You have your reverb created by this shaking plate, basically being excited by whatever the source is, in our case, guitar. Much like a spring reverb, same sort of thing, except instead of a sheet of metal, we have a spring, right? And this is, old Fender amps, right? They would actually have a spring tank in the back. It's always funny. I remember back in the day having amps with spring reverbs, right? And if you made the mistake of tilting them and kind of, shaking them or letting them kind of hit the ground too hard, you'd get this god-awful explosion sound, right? Which would scare everybody in the vicinity. Because that spring was actually shaking, and these transducers are picking it up and firing it back out through your speaker, right? So we have a couple springs. So those are those ones. Now we also have these other like room, chamber, hall, cave, tile. These are all going to be types of rooms, right? So a room is just that. It's a simple room like I'm in, right? And depending on the size of the room, which we can adjust with decay and so on and so forth, we're going to get different sounds out of our room. Chamber, as I understand it, and this is a bit of a vague description, but back in the day where maybe recording studios wanted maybe a nice reverberant space, they would dedicate a room and maybe put really reflective surfaces in it. So in a smaller space, they could maybe get some really exaggerated reverb sounds. So I don't know if that's what Line 6 was going after here, but that is in my estimation, my understanding of what chamber reverb usually is. Hall is more trying to mimic the sound of an acoustically designed hall. So something like a chamber would be more maybe of an imperfect reverb, you know, if that's a way to describe it. And hall would be more like, hey, we're in a concert hall, which there was a lot of engineering that went into making this hall sound really, really good for live performance. So that hopefully the reverb is going to sound much better and just maybe much more controlled, if that's a way to put it. So that's usually what hall is. Echo, I'm not totally certain what they were going after here. It seemed to me in a quick pass through it, it's more of a short echo, almost like setting a delay really, really short. But again, not that important. You can take a listen to it yourself and make your own deductions. Tile would be, I'm guessing, more like, you know, if you went and recorded in a bathroom where lots of tile surfaces, lots of reflective surfaces. Cave, pretty self-explanatory again, right? Kind of long, very reverberant sound to if we were to yell into a cave, maybe, you know, that sort of thing. Ducking is much like with delays, right? So what we want there is while we're playing, and I haven't even played with this, so again, I'm just going by what my normal understanding of ducking is. While we're playing, the reverb would not be as prominent based on our settings as it would be when we stop playing, and then the reverb would kind of come in. So it's a way to maybe have, you know, a chord hit, and then when we not have the reverb kind of wash it out, and then have it louder when the playing ceases, much like with delay. So that could be useful times too. Octo, I believe, just kind of adds almost like pitch shifting to the delay, giving it an octave up sound, I believe. And particle verb, these are I don't really fully know exactly what they're trying to mimic, but they have a very identifiable sound. We'll run through it in a minute and go through some of these. But let's just go back to the really common ones for now and talk a little bit about the common parameters that we have on these. And I think once we have an understanding of that, it really doesn't matter about knowing or not knowing what these other reverbs are, you know, exactly modeled after, because we can use our ear then and listen and go, yeah, I don't really like that sound for this particular case, but we do know how to dial it in based off of the parameters. So decay is pretty simple. Decay is going to be how big that room is, right? Or that reverberant space, or basically how long that reverb tail is going to go on for, right? So I'm on a plate setting here, okay? So let's just turn our mix up a bit and hear what happens to demonstrate that. So if I just hit a chord, you hear how that reverb went on a fair amount of time. If I go way down to a much lower setting, so big, huge difference. Got a tiny bit of reverb, it tailed right off. If we go to the other extreme, right, and on and on and on, right? So we have to decide how big we want the reverb, and we will come back to that in a moment, okay? Pre-delay is going to be, and we'll dive in a little more with how I will dial these in very soon, but I'll just go through them right away. Pre-delay is going to be how long it's going to take that before that reverb actually starts reverberating, okay? So if I set this to 0, basically as soon as I hit my note, the reverb's going to start, all right? Let's turn this up a little more dramatic. Actually, sorry. So as soon as I hit that note, it's kind of drenched in reverb. Now, if I move the pre-delay up even to, say, 20 milliseconds, we actually hear a little more of our note bloom before the reverb kind of jumps all over it, okay? So that's going to be a very important setting we'll come back to. Low cut and high cut, much like in delays or any other speaker cabs and everything else, it's going to be how much of the low frequencies we don't want the reverb to be in the reverb, basically. So reverb can eat up a lot of space in a mix and start to wash things out pretty easily. So there's not a lot of really low or upper information we would probably want in there. If we were to just say, you know, no high cuts and no low cuts on a reverb. Sorry, turn that up. here up top, there's... See, it's a little bit less top end on just the reverb tails. That's another good point, actually. I had a lot of people ask me, does that affect the whole signal? And in this case here, no. For reverbs and delays and whatnot, all it's doing is it's affecting the reverb portion of the signal. It's not going to affect the normal portion of your guitar or your speaker cabinet or anything. So it's just cutting the highs off of the reverb. So it darkens it up, right? If we go way up here, we may end up, in a mix, maybe getting in the way of the cymbals and might notice, man, the cymbals don't sound quite, because they're being washed out a little bit by this big reverb. And again, if we don't have that much reverb on, it's probably not going to be that big a difference. But if it's a really atmospheric sound, it's going to take up room in the mix. So we'd want to be careful about that. I have no idea where that was set previously, 4.6, okay. And our mix... very, very important. This is going to be how much direct signal we're going to get versus how much reverb we're going to get. So if we go to 50%, it basically should be about equal, right? Same amount volume of reverb as direct signal. If we go 100%, all we're going to get is reverb. That's where you're really going to hear your pre-delay. Watch this. If I go down to 0, we're going to hear the reverb come in instantly as soon as I pick. But if I go to another extreme, you hear the delay, I pick, then there's reverb, right? So if I go really extreme, it's a whole fifth of a second before that starts. So we can this is an interesting way to hear what these parameters do, right? Is set the mix to 100 so our direct signal is gone, and then kind of dive in and see what's going on. So I could do the same thing with high cut, right? You hear all up those upper frequencies versus it dulls the reverb down a bit. We don't have those. Okay, so we could use that to dial in what pre-delay we want. See, right in there is usually kind of not bad. Okay, obviously that's way overdone. So, depending on the purpose, you could end up 25, 30%. You can hear that even though I have a very high decay, it's still not engulfing my sound, right? I don't consider that a really well dialed in delay. It's way long on the decay. You might pull something like this back and then bring your mix up, right? Okay, let's talk about how we could dial these in then on different particular situations. Now, when I get patches from folks and they say, please tweak my patch to make it, and then they'll usually give me a good description on how to do it. One of the tough ones is reverb, right? Because I don't know what they're planning on playing with this particular patch, necessarily what song it is. And, the amount of reverb we want could be dependent on the tempo that the song is at. If we're doing some sort of thing where there's a particular beat we're following and we're playing some sort of reggae style, chord stabs, we could end up saying, wow, the decay is really long because I'm hitting one chord and that decay is so long that by the time I hit my next chord, the previous delay is still going on into the next 2 or 3 hits, and then that's just going to start building up on itself, right, and not sound very good. So I'm just using this as one example, but in that case, let's say I had... I kind of want to set this so that it's out of the way for my next hit, possibly, right? Now, maybe a little bit too much on the mix there too, but... Right, that same thing with that turned off. Right. Now, you might say, well, maybe the pre-delay is too long on that because maybe I do want it to come in a little earlier. So maybe I set it at 5 or 6 milliseconds. right? And then a lot of it's going to be personal preference, dialing in the mix higher or lower, right? So when we talk about that, so the decay basically is very simple, but we just think about our particular scenario, right? If it's something very atmospheric that we're doing and we want a very long reverb, we can just dial this up to taste, right? So you notice there, I'm playing much more sparse. So the things aren't going to build up as much, right? So we could almost think about it as the busier we're playing, probably the shorter decay, maybe the less mix we're going to want, and maybe the more sparse we're playing, a little bit more decay that we could get away with, a little bit more mix possibly, you know. If we want our sound to sit back in the mix more and be more buried, we're going to go higher mix, maybe a bit of a longer decay, right? If we want it to be more out front and abrupt sounding and cut through the mix, we're going to want to be careful not to put that mix too high. We're going to want to maybe pull that decay back so it's not getting on top of notes, right? So the more notes we're playing, maybe we're going to go a little less dramatic, right? So that's something to keep in mind. And again, this is so hard to tell somebody how they should dial it in because every circumstance is going to make for a different possible setting, and just personal preference as well, right? So let's talk about pre-delay. You know, I oftentimes think about pre-delay almost like attack on a compressor in a sense, and I think it helps to think about that. If you go back and watch my video on compressors, I talked a lot about the attack of the note. If we set it too fast, we end up chopping the pick attack off our sound, and it really alters, that might be what you want, but that really is going to alter our guitar tone, right? So we're going to lose the dynamics of that pick attack and not be able to control as much because as soon as we hit the strings, it's just gone, right? So in a way, pre-delay is in a way like that. How quickly do we want that reverb to kind of engulf our pick attack, right? So if we set it to 0, it's going to be right on top of it right away, which is going to give the impression of softening it, right? So I could say that's a fairly dramatic amount of reverb there. Now if I just bring that pre-delay, say up to 20 milliseconds, you can hear the difference in the pick attack now. Yuck, terrible note. So you can hear the difference. Now, I mean, you can be really dramatic about it too. I don't know if I really ever end up way up here. You can really hear how that allows us to maybe be a little bit more dramatic with our reverb settings and still allow it to not bury our pick attack and the notes pop a little bit more, right? Okay, so lots of reverb still, but it's not totally engulfing our sound because of the pre-delay. So that's a very important setting, regardless of which type of reverb you're using. So I hope that helps as far as the particular parameters, right? So let's take that now and go through a couple of these other settings. So we have a room reverb, very different effect than the plate, right? You can kind of hear that. That's just much more kind of dead sounding, right? Even at the dramatic settings. So this is a good reverb if we're just trying to mimic more the sound of us playing a normal amp just in a normal size room that we would be playing in a house or any other place, right? So we can really use these same parameters to dial that in to a useful setting. Now, again, the mix is set kind of high here. I would say if I was, and a lot of times the way that I use reverb, I'm not really into a lot of the atmospheric stuff. I like to just sort of set a reverb to sound much like giving it a little bit of realism, like an amp sitting in a room playing, right? So this could be a very big part of getting that. So I might set my mix to maybe 30, my pre-delay. At those settings, 11, 10, 15, somewhere in there. It's a kind of sound where it's almost not even apparent that I have a reverb on, And this is one of the things that I got from a lot of folks in telling me, don't ever put a compressor at the end of the chain, right? Because you shouldn't have to compress reverb and whatnot. Well, I've covered that in a lot of other videos. But even with this on or off, sound got louder, obviously, because it's set that way. But it's really not having any adverse effects on the reverb. It's fine with it on, you know what I mean? I'll leave it off for now just because I'm trying to focus just more on getting the reverbs to sound a certain way, right? So there's a very nice room reverb sound, right? And again, we could go more, you want a bigger room. It's really going to depend on what you're playing again. Do we want that reverb to be gone by the next time we hit a chord, or do we want it to still be going on and kind of mush things together? Really open to personal preference. Okay, so that's nice. We can mess around with that. Understanding what the parameters do now, we're going to be able to dial in a reverb sound very quickly, right? We go to a chamber. Let's hear how that's going to affect the chamber. Let's pull our pre-delay back kind of to where we had it. And there's what I was talking about, more of these like an imperfect reverb decay, right? Very nice, though. Very nice reverb. I might, if I was using this just as an all-purpose reverb. If you notice, I'm trying not to make my reverb super noticeable, just more there. Add a bit of ambience to the sound, right? Oh, nice there. Hall. Now this is going to be much larger sounding. If we kind of hear the decay is a little more perfect, if that's a word or a way to describe it, than the chamber, right? So while that has a really long decay because of my pre-delay setting and my mix not being too ridiculously high, I can actually get away with a pretty extreme decay on this. Now somebody who's playing really sparse might want to bring this up even more. If you want a little bit more of the highs in there. Okay, obviously a little big maybe for doing quicker lead. It's going to obviously mush that up, and you can kind of hear what I'm saying with this particular patch. If I was going to play some overdriven sound and playing like quicker leads, I'm going to lose some definition in my sound. It might make it at the time seem like it's easier to play stuff like that, but really that's just not going to cut through the mix. So, you know, that would be a totally inappropriate reverb to be going, you know, doing this type of a quick playing. But if I want to be more, you know, something sparse like that, then I'm going to be able to get away with it a little bit more. And that's even pretty dramatic still, right? You see, just by bringing that decay down, it's going to allow me to get away with a little bit more. Really going through all of these echo, it's going to be very similar stuff, right? Like I said before, we can just kind of dive into these ourselves. Kind of hear, no matter how dramatic I go on this one. Okay, that was too dramatic, but okay, so now we're getting into that area where it gets pretty springy up, digitally springy up top there, if that's a great description. So this is going to be almost, I would describe like a slapback type of a delay effect in a way. There's that sort of bathroom tile type of sound. So just by, but all the same parameters, right? So just by going through these one at a time, we can kind of set some extreme settings and listen to see if that's the particular sound we're going for, you know? There's, like I said before, the long kind of cave, right, sound. Maybe using it for swells or something like that. So again, it's just a different flavor of reverb, same parameters, same control. Here was I was saying the ducking, right? Where it's probably just going to not be as apparent while I'm playing and then kind of come in more after the fact. Right, it's not walking all over my playing. can kind of hear it come in after the fact, okay? So it's almost like it's compressing the reverb while I'm playing at keeping it at a lower level, and then releasing and allowing it to do its thing after. Octo, adding those octave pitches in there. Spring, you know, much like an old Spring amp. I like Spring reverbs. I think it's just because I grew up with amps with them in. Again, with a little more pre-delay, I can get away with a little bit more. Probably way too much decay there. And maybe a touch less mix. No, nothing wrong with that. Maybe slightly less decay if you... If we just turn that off, we hear the dry signal again. It's subtle, but it works, you know. So that's a setting I would possibly use. By the way, I'm using Voltage Queen amp. I really like this amp. I don't get to use it too often, but I thought it would be a nice one just to demonstrate these. Another Spring reverb, you know, similar, probably just a different flavor of the same kind of a thing. Seems like the decay is longer on this. Works. Particle verb, it's going to be much more atmospheric, right? Dwell on this. It's going to be how long this particle type sound, whatever that means, is going to go on for. You get the idea on that. Stable versus critical. Hazard. Again, it doesn't take long to figure out what's going on there and whether that's something we need or want. Something neat with this, if you really want some atmospheric stuff, you can set a fairly long dwell, set the mix to 100, and then everything you hit isn't going to come through. You're just going to hear the reverb, right? Almost create little chords within your reverb there with that. So that you know, that's something that works. If you bring your mix back, you're getting a little bit of your direct signal. Okay. Let's jump over to some of the new reverbs. Now, with these here, there's going to be some other features here. They're adding some modulation in. I'm not going to really dive in. It's some more tone controls. Modulation is just going to affect, again, whatever modulation they are putting on is just going to affect the reverb and not your direct signal again, right? So something like the Ganymede I've used a few times that I really like. It seemed quite a nice reverb. on with that. So I'm still able to get away with kind of, that's fairly dramatic settings on that, but something more... kind of dry, but by bringing that mix down, right, it dries it up a bit. A little more presence in the mix. Still got a nice little bit of reverb at the end. You know, versus if that was off. Okay. And again, you know, you can go through these and another pitch one. This is kind of neat. The plateau is kind of cool because I was kind of messed with this a little bit. It's actually adding different pitches to it. One thing I found was cool. You could almost, by assigning one of the pitches to your expression pedal, you could almost turn it into like a bit of a whammy pedal for just your reverb portion of your tone, right? So... could assign both of them to that, I guess, if you wanted to. Yeah, it's just kind of a neat thing. So we can kind of hear what's going on there. It's a big reverb with pitch shifting going on within it as well. Double tank. Can really hear the modulation going on, so we could set the rate. Just like in my modulation, it's going to be the same sort of things, right? Set the rate of that, the amount of modulation maybe. See how those reverb trails are a little bit more stable now. They're not being modulated as much. Do you hear the modulation in the reverb tails? So because, again, I got the pre-delay, I could probably go a little bit more on. It's a pretty big reverb, but it's out of the way of my playing, you know? So again, I'm probably not going to put this on if I'm planning on, you know, doing some shreddy type thing. Not that this is the guitar or the tone for that, but, you know, it's probably not going to be my go-to thing for that type of playing, but... So nice stuff there. Like I said, Ganymede's nice. Glitz, I haven't played much. Again, you know, so like I said, one of the things you'd probably want to do with this is to dive in, listen to each one, and get a handle on what each characteristic of each particular reverb is and whether it's something you would need for a particular situation. I think a lot of times we just maybe, and myself included, like I said, Glitz, Ganymede, Plateau, Delta, I don't know what any of these are when they're first released, right? So I need to educate myself. So by educating ourselves with it, you go listen and go, oh yeah, okay, that's kind of cool. You put that in your memory bank and say, you know what, next time I have a situation where I need that sound, I know where to go for it. And that's all I ever do with this stuff, right? But that really the point of this video was more about saying, hey, once we understand what decay does, what pre-delay does, what mix does, what the lows and high cuts do, and then obviously some of these have other modulation things in there, we can really be able to dial in a reverb sound very quickly. Add to that, educating ourselves about what sort of the characteristics of each reverb are, you know, what's a plate sound like, what's a room sound like, what's a chamber. We're going to be able to very quickly and almost instinctively grab whatever reverb we need, know how big we want it to be, know how much pre-delay we're going to need, maybe where our low and high cuts go. Oh, it's too dark sounding. Okay, you know, take the high cut and raise it. It's too boomy sounding on the point. Okay, bring the low cut up, right? There's just too much overall reverb. Okay, I want to hear more direct signal. Bring your mix back. Maybe add a little more pre-delay. Let that cut through, you know? So once we understand what those things are doing, then it's going to make it a lot easier for us to possibly dial in our reverb. So I don't know. I hope I didn't just ramble on about nothing there. And I hope that somebody found that useful. I've been wanting to do a reverb demo video for a while and just talk more about the parameters. And I hope that that this has helped some folks to possibly be able to dial the reverbs in a little bit more accurately to what they are hearing in their head and in a way that's not going to be a detriment to their sound in the end. Okay, so anyways, thank you guys for tuning in. Sorry, another long-winded video. I haven't done a really long-winded one in a while, so I figured I was overdue to bore you guys for a while. So no, I really appreciate all the support and that you guys have given me. And if there's any questions or comments, please leave them. I always try to get back to everybody as soon as I can. And please hit the subscribe button if you haven't, and share the video, like it, and all those good YouTube things. And we'll talk to you guys next time. We'll be back with more very soon. All right. Thanks for tuning in, and ciao for now.